And we're going to hit record in three, two. Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. As you know, this podcast is all about wealth creation and obtaining freedom in every aspect. And I think the more you understand how the world works, maybe what it's doing right, what it's doing wrong, the more you can make adjustments. And that's why we have this next guest on the podcast, Erwin I was going to say Garfunkel, but it's Garfinkel. Probably get that a lot. He wrote a book called Wealth and Welfare States. Is America a laggard or a leader? And I will say right out of the gate, that question prompts me to answer. I believe it's a laggard simply because it is a welfare state, and that into which you reward and incentivize, you will get more of. And I think it's creating a lot of problems in this world of how it's operating. So thank you so much for being here, Erwin Garfinkel. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Well, let's start off with the genesis of this book. Why did you write Wealth and Welfare States?
I wrote it because I think there are three myths about the American welfare state that lead us in the wrong direction. So, one is that the American welfare state has always been a laggard, has lagged behind other rich nations.
Yep.
A second is that the American welfare state is unusually small. And perhaps most important, the third one is that the American welfare state and welfare states more generally retard economic growth, are inefficient, and would be better off without the welfare state. All of those are myths and all of them are incorrect.
Ooh.
And maybe we should start with I'll start with the first.
Okay.
So, the United States has not always been a laggard in the welfare state. And in fact, we were a leader in the most productive part of the welfare state for most of the 19th and 20th century, and that is free public education. So, the United States from about the middle of the 19th century, 1850 or so, led the world in the provision of elementary education. In 1850, before the Civil War, it was just in the North. But after the Civil War, it expanded to the rest of the nation. Other states adopted free public education. The evidence of the productivity of education is overwhelming. Virtually every economist agrees that free public education at the elementary and secondary levels are incredibly productive.
Hmm.
It's part of what made the United States a world leader in capitalism, this particular form of socialism. So that's the first point. Second point is that we're not unusually small welfare state. If you count correctly, we are pretty much in the middle of the range. And when I say count correctly, the critical thing that's not counted is health insurance that are provided by employers. Health insurance, whether it's provided by the government or by employers, reduces the cost at the point of purchase of health care. And that means we know if you reduce the cost, we're going to demand more of that subsidized good. When you include the employer provided provisions in the welfare state, which you should, it's not that we should be doing it that way, but that's the way we do it. So you need to count that cost because we pay the cost. We pay close to twice as much for personal health care as every other rich nation. So we don't have an unusually small welfare state. We have a distorted welfare state, which is incredibly expensive in terms of the health care we provide. And last, the productivity issue. So it's not the case that welfare states reduce productivity, quite the opposite, with the exception of pensions for the aged and health care for the aged. Virtually every part of the welfare state is productive and leads to greater education, better health, longevity of the population. And in the book, Wealth and Welfare States, we actually understate the productivity of cash investments. And because most of the cash that we send out in the American welfare state is for the aged. And that's not productive. We do that out of respect for the aged and a sense that there will be something there for them in retirement. But what I've learned subsequent to the publication of Wealth and Welfare States is in the last 10 years, there's been an incredible amount of research, natural experiments that show the productivity of cash transfers to families with children. So, for example, food stamps, people that got food stamps, their children did better as adults. They committed less crime. They got more education. They earned more. They were healthier. They lived longer. And we now have incredibly strong empirical evidence from the last 10 years that supports those statements. So I'll stop. That's a
That was
long
a lot
answer
to
to
digest
your
there.
question.
Well, when I hear the phrase welfare state, I just think of
Sure.
the government is taking care of the kids and the sick. And I think that anytime you have government in every aspect of your life, a lot of problems could come from that. And so do you believe that when the government gets in bed with the school system or the healthcare industry, that it could only lead to corruption? Yes, there potentially is some good, but I believe that once government gets involved in your school system, there could be a lot of propaganda. There could be things that are in place not to benefit society, but to benefit bigger government. So the same thing happens with the health industry. So I just look at those two aspects, and I'm seeing it clear as day whenever it comes to Obamacare getting involved, having certain things in place. A doctor has to prescribe pills based off of certain phrases that a person says to the doctor, and therefore raising the price of pharmaceuticals, causing insurance to cost more. And now the government is not only controlling your education, but your health. Scary, in my opinion. Do you agree with me, or do you have maybe a great rebuttal?
I don't agree with you. I think government is responsible for the expansion of education. We know that before government provision, it was only a minority of the population in every country that got an education. And as I say, the United States led the way. This was not at the federal level, this was at the state and local level. And That's one of the reasons our leadership in the provision, the public provision of education, is one of the crucial reasons that we are as wealthy as we are. And if you're a capitalist, which I am a capitalist as
All
well
right.
as a professor, uh, having an educated workforce is critical to your own productivity. It's also critical that your workforce be healthy, which is one of the reasons that employers have invested in healthcare. There's also a tax subsidy that leads them to do that. But the employer provided healthcare is not the best way to provide health care. And I don't agree that government involvement is necessarily an evil. It's possible, and there is corruption involved in government, not just in government, but there's also corruption involved in any society, in the private sector as well as the public sector. So that's a danger that we need to be alert to. But the idea that it's inevitable that it will be corrupt and pull us down is simply not factually based.
So in your book, I'd love to see if you touch on this subject, but Lyndon Baines Johnson was a major believer in the welfare state, right? And what he implemented, I think, what was it, the late 60s, early 70s, was having the government take care of single parent households and welfare really stepping in and saving the day, which allowed for single moms to have the government give them the money rather than the father figure. And there is an obvious difference between before and after this welfare state was enacted by Lyndon Baines Johnson about how the family structure looked. And so I think, and maybe if you can correct me or maybe agree with me, one of the great ways of seeing if a person's going to end up in the criminal system is if it's a two-parent household. And the moment that the welfare system was enacted and government got involved, division of husband and wife was automatic, causing a single parent household, causing individuals to be raised in a family without a dad around, leading to a life of crime and poverty.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen that in many aspects. So, do you think that the welfare state was put in place to do that on purpose? Or do you think that was just a byproduct of whenever you have government taking care of the family rather than the father? What are your thoughts?
So it's not correct to say that what Linda Jane Baines Johnson created the aid to families with dependent children. That dates back to the beginning of the 20th century, was called Mother's Pensions. Um, and it's a myth that welfare is primarily responsible for single parent families. We had plenty of single parent families before welfare. Most of them in the beginning was caused by death. So by the time we got to the mid 60s, 1960s, there was an expansion. There was more family desertion, which also took place, I should say, in the Great Depression. And the leading cause of the expansion of single parent families was not welfare, but rather the deindustrialization. And we see that it was first in the Black community. Unfortunately, we now see it in the Midwest where um, jobs have left, well-paying jobs have left, and um, if a man doesn't have a well-paying job, it's hard to support a family. And that's true for whites, it's true for blacks, it's true for Americans, it's true across the world. And we saw, by the way, in Russia, when the Soviet Union split up and Russia became poorer, uh, the men started, and they couldn't get decent jobs. The men started drinking themselves to death, and their uh, lifespan actually declined. We now see a teeny bit of that in the United States as well. Hopefully, it won't get larger, but it's not, welfare is not the driving force.
I will say, I think the idea, the concept of welfare to help people in need, that's never a bad thing. I just think that everybody is like an animal, and we just run off of rewards and incentives. And I think that maybe there was intention to help people in need, but it really did provide a way out. Oh, you mean to tell me that if I get a divorce, I'll get welfare? Oh, you mean to tell me if I don't get a job that they're going to take care of me? What the heck would I do that for? Why would I get a job that's going to pay roughly the same amount? Case in point, let me hear what you think about this. 2011, I was struggling financially like crazy. I couldn't afford the individual mandate that Obama put in place, which means
Yeah.
I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have a job. I was starting a business. I had no money coming in. I had side jobs, right? Small side jobs, nothing full time. So my employer didn't pay for insurance. And I went to my accountant to say, hey, I didn't really make any money this year. And he's like, well, did you pay for insurance? No. Well, then you're going to get fined for not paying for the individual mandate. You're going to have to actually pay a fee for not having the money to pay for insurance. And it didn't make any sense to me. I said, well, how do you get around it? He said, well, since you have a company in your name, it's absolutely impossible to get this welfare or this insurance given to you. So what you would need to do to get health care given to you by Obamacare is give up the business, give up on your dream. And I thought to myself, wait a second, that's
Yeah.
de-incentivizing the average person from going after their dreams.
I
So I
agree.
paid the individual mandate and went on with my life. I thought to myself, wait a second, this government put together this incentive to give up on your dreams so they take care of you with health. And I thought, that's insane. What do you say about that?
So actually, I agree with that. I think that was a negative aspect of Obamacare, which got eliminated.
By Trump, thank
Thankfully.
God.
Sorry, by who?
Trump. Trump got rid of it.
No, he did not, it was gotten rid of before Trump. And Trump tried to get rid of Obamacare, fortunately, did not succeed because of John McCain voted against Trump.
It was
But
almost
it,
gone. Almost gone. Yeah.
and that would have been tragic because Obamacare is now very successful. The one aspect of it, well, there were other aspects, but that was probably the worst aspect. I agree with you. That was a stupid policy,
All
and
right.
they got rid of it. They got rid of it before Trump.
Oh, I thought Trump was responsible.
No,
Okay.
Trump tried to kill the whole uh, Obamacare. I hope it comes back uh, as an issue because Trump's still trying to kill Obamacare, and
All
that
right. All right. I'm going to jump in there. I'm going to jump in. I'm glad we agree on something. But the individual mandate, a key provision of the Affordable Care Act, for Obamacare was effectively nullified by the Congress through the Tax Cuts and the Jobs Act of 2017, signed into law by the one and only, possibly the greatest president of all time, President Donald Trump, on December 22nd, 2017. That's amazing right there.
Well, if I was wrong about that, I apologize. But the idea that Trump is possibly the greatest
I might have added
makes
that. Chat
makes
GPT
me
didn't do that.
makes
I'm
me
just saying.
suspicious of the citation. So,
I'm just having fun with you. Yeah.
what
But that's Chat GPT that I just pulled that up on.
what a historical uh, misperception. It's hard.
But
Uh,
Trump did. I remember him saying that over and over. I'm going to get rid of the individual mandate. And I thought to myself, that is crazy. They were penalizing me for being too broke to afford insurance. And I thought that was my first introduction to the welfare state that was around us. So I'm in favor that you agree with me on that because that is huge. And so I just look at incentives and rewards, right? So when you see some of these welfare,
Same here.
yeah.
I'm trained as an economist as well as a social worker, and I believe incentives play a big role. And we should be very careful about the right incentives, designing the right incentives. But the evidence is pretty overwhelming that the programs that are designed to aid the poor are incredibly effective in terms of promoting their children's well-being.
Hmm. Do you believe that in order to receive, let's just say welfare, forget about health insurance for a moment, but maybe even to receive health care, that you would need to play by the rules of society or take drug tests or to do something to earn it? And the reason why I ask that is
No,
because,
no,
okay, uh,
no. Just as I would not have tests for free public education, I would not have tests. Uh, Most people play by the rules. And the idea that you would uh, sig signal out the low income population as a condition of getting assistance, I wouldn't do that with retirement benefits for the aged. We don't ask them to take a test. Uh, if they contribute, that's sufficient. They've earned the benefit. And so, no, I
so
wouldn't.
so even if people were criminals, lifelong criminals, do you think they should still receive a stipend or universal basic income, basically?
Well, I think if you're a lifelong criminal, you belong in jail.
So, right? But there are people,
Which,
there's no
which by
cash
the
bail.
way,
There's
which
no
by
cash
the
bail now.
way, is it is free room and board.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, put them in prison. But what we're seeing in very Marxist, Democrat, socialist states, and you maybe can correct me on this, there's no cash bail. People are going to jail and being let out the same day. It's pretty scary, and they're getting.
So you are wrong. You're so far wrong on that. The Scandinavian uh, nations, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, have crime rates that are like a fifth of our crime rates. Why? Because they provide for their population. They all have child allowances. Their kids grow up in an environment that they're not that they're secure, economically secure for the most part compared to the United States.
Wow. Are
We're
there
all
penalties crazier?
pardon?
Do they have crazier penalties when it comes to prison sentences? Because I would think that that might be an add-on.
No, no, they have. I think most of them don't even have death penalties.
Wow.
And But the United States is peculiar in this respect. We have a lot of strengths that are unique to America, including most especially, we're an immigrant nation, and that gives us an incredible comparative advantage over other countries. But a negative that we have is from the beginning, we have been a gun culture nation.
Hmm.
And that's part of our problem. You could say it's also a strength, but it's more a weakness than a strength. We have higher murder rates. Um, but that's
Specifically in gun-free zones like Chicago, right?
Actually the big cities have lower murder rates, especially New York. You're safer in New York City than most any other place in the country.
So wait a second. I gotta double check on that one. New York City is safer than most places in the country.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know about that, but Chicago, I believe, has a right around on average every weekend 15 to 17 deaths by
Well,
gun.
Chicago is got more homicides than New York per capita, quite a bit more.
Got it. All right. And in the United States, it looks like I'm looking at St. Louis, Baltimore, Detroit, New Orleans have reported the most reported highest murder rates per capita. Interesting. So St. Louis, Baltimore, Detroit, and New Orleans.
Yeah, yeah.
Which so when I'm looking at so which cities, and I'm just gonna pull this up. Who knows if this is right, but we're just pulling it. Which cities have the highest gun related murders in United States in USA? And I'm just gonna pull this up here. It looks like St. Louis, Birmingham, Detroit, Memphis, Tennessee. Interesting. Chicago, there it is. Okay. Other cities with significant gun homicides and issues are Chicago, Philadelphia, LA, those three.
How about doing it by state?
And so how would you break it down?
Well, so there are lots of rural areas where uh, the homicide rate per capita is higher than in cities.
Hmm. But what
So,
I'm seeing here, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but
yeah.
Chicago, Philadelphia, LA, to me, those are very, very heavily regulated gun areas, right? Why is that the possibility? I mean, these are all Democrats to cities too. How is that possible if the Democrats have the answers for this? Because, in my opinion, if you say no guns, criminals, but the criminals are like, we're criminals. We don't play by the rules anyway. You're only hurting law-abiding citizens.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, that to me doesn't make any sense. How do you justify that?
So I think if you look at the effects of the ban on automatic weapons that was in place for like 5 years, 10 years, maybe it was 10.
Mid 90s, you're talking about whenever old Joe Biden made the change. Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
he was a senator then, yes, and
Yes.
he was one of the leaders, and uh, that had a very positive effect on reducing mass murders. Um, and when it was lifted, when it was not reenacted, we've had mass murders. I don't know, weekly, daily. I mean, it's a mess. It's a mess. And the idea that no regulation works um, is ridiculous on its face.
Well, I just think that if I see Chicago and LA, which I know if you go to Chicago and you have a gun on you as a law-abiding citizen, you're in some serious trouble. You go through New York City, New Jersey, and you have a gun on you and it's loaded and you're a law-abiding citizen, you better watch out unless you have a license there. But criminals, they're allowed to carry, they don't care about getting busted with a gun. But if they have a gun and a law-abiding citizen doesn't, to me, it just makes it very lopsided. So I look at that and I say, who's causing all the pain? Usually it's criminals on criminals is what I'm seeing. So scary times, I think, if you're trying to take away people's guns. Sounds like you're not in favor of taking all guns away, just automatic, semi-automatic. Is that right?
Yes. Well, if I could find a way to reduce the number of guns across the country, I would do that, but we've gone a long ways from the welfare state.
So my question to you is, are you a constitutionalist? Yeah, because if it says the right to bear arms, I would assume since you're teaching in school, you
I'm
teach the
de I'm
Constitution.
I'm definitely a constitutionalist. I think that is a gross distortion of the meaning of the Constitution that the Supreme Court has done. And not in my lifetime, possibly not in your lifetime as well. But at some point, that will be reversed. It's a historical, uh, what can I say? Anyway,
So, so, all right. Now, going forward, I guess, into the utopian society that you dream of here, that you believe, you're saying no guns. Then you would say get away from guns. How do you stop somebody from getting a 3D printer and making a gun, which I have seen on YouTube many times that anybody can create a gun in the future? How do you stop that? In my opinion, this is maybe where we very much differ. The
yeah.
only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And every mass murder ever in the history of I've ever watched the news was stopped by a good guy with a gun. So what would you say about that? Do you believe no guns, period?
Uh, I'm not prepared to continue this conversation about guns. You asked me on to talk about the welfare state.
Got it. Got it. Okay,
I'm
let's get back to the
happy
welfare
to
state.
do that. I am happy to do that. I will just say, I think your views on this are mistaken, misguided. But that's all I'll say.
Good deal. We'll get back to the welfare state here because okay, last question I have for you, and this is a deep one. All right, let me see. You're a professor. You've obviously are well thought out in this world, but all right, I went to school. I was a B student. I get out of school. I'm a senior in college, basically. A guy gives me Rich Dad Poor Dad. Have you ever read this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad?
I've heard of it, but
Okay.
I
I,
can't.
I'll tell you a little bit about this book, but this book changed my life. It was for that very first moment at 22 years old that I realized what an asset was, what a liability was, how the wealthy think. And so
Yeah.
when you write a book called Wealth and the Welfare States, I just love talking about how everybody can create wealth. Now, why isn't, when you talk about the public education system, why didn't the school system give me insight that I interview I get to interview multimillionaires every day, and we're talking about Think and Grow Rich, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, influence, authority, right? All of these books that are super, super important to us, but they've never given us that in school. A Rich Dad, Poor Dad, if that was given to me in school, I'd be a multi millionaire at this point. So I'm thinking to myself, why isn't the school system teaching us about wealth creation and giving us books that the wealthy are actually preaching on a daily basis? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. So I think as by and large, our education system, despite its many flaws, is doing a remarkable job. And it's, as I say, responsible for it's one of the big reasons we are as wealthy as we are. And the fact that it took you to the age 22 to get the books that made a big difference for you. Um, the fact is, you learn to read books, and that's the source of knowledge that you're building on. And hopefully, you will continue to read books, and hopefully,
I
you'll
do. I do.
hopefully you'll read some books that are more accurate than some of the stuff that you've been spewing today.
You are a good sport because, yeah, you don't know who I am and you're able to just have the courage to jump on. So I respect that. You have no idea how much I respect that because many people turn me down. But anyways, yeah, I have fallen in love with reading, but it wasn't because of school. It was whenever I graduated from school. It was because my employer gave me that. And it really did teach me how to get what I wanted. And so I guess my question to you is, why isn't it that the wealthiest people on this planet they're not being like maybe coaxed by the school system to say, what would you teach your kids? What are you teaching your kids? Because I'm in these rooms with some of them, two specifically, are billionaires. And I'm telling you, they're teaching their kids the complete opposite of what the school system's teaching. So my question to you is, why is the school system not adopting what the wealthy teach their kids? Do you think there's any type of maybe conspiracy or a programming that's happening to kids at a young age that maybe we should be aware of? Or do you think that it's just we teach people the basics and then it's up to you to do whatever you want with it? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the wealthy are not uniform, and I think that's very fortunate. So, what the wealthy teach their kids varies depending on the values of the wealthy parents. And some of them are just interested in making money, nothing else. And they teach their kids that. Others are concerned with society as a whole, and they teach their kids to be concerned not just with making money, but living in a democratic society and behaving responsibly, and not falling for propaganda, whether from the left or the right. Um, and I think the schools, despite not living up to it, believe that. That's an essential part of the public school system, is an attempt to provide the basics for living in a democratic society. Uh, there we owe a great debt to Thomas Jefferson, who was a slave owner, but was otherwise a really remarkable man. And
There we go. We're agreeing on something. We're
believed,
agreeing on another thing. That's great.
believed in public education um, to his core. And he is one of the reasons he couldn't succeed to his dying day in his home state of Virginia, to get them to adopt free public education. And it's because of slavery. No slave state adopted free public education, which not only harmed the slaves, but harmed poor whites as well. And there's an expression, uh, how you going to keep them down on the farm once they've seen, I think it's Paris or something like that. But if you're a slave owner, you don't want to educate your slaves. If you were a landowner in Europe, you didn't want to educate your workforce because they would go to the city. who was it that supported education? It was the new capitalists. And they're the ones that supported free public education across the rich world. There wasn't, and most especially in the United States of America, it was the capitalists who supported free public education.
Man, you're speaking my language when you're praising the capitalists. I'm loving that aspect because you know I'm a major capitalist. So
There's lots to praise about capitalism. It's a wonderful system for creating wealth, especially when moderated by the welfare state. So the combination of capitalism and the welfare state has led to the richest countries across that the world has ever witnessed.
I'm with you. So my last question for you, sir, is
Yeah.
what is the recipe for success? All right. If somebody's reading this book, what would you want them to walk away with? Now, my philosophy is this, and you probably hear me say this over and over if you listen to this podcast: think like an entrepreneur. All right. I say this over and over because
Yes.
capitalism is the way to freedom. And yes, we do need the government, right? We need police officers, we need roads, we need a military. But the more that they are out of your everyday life, the better, in my opinion. So an entrepreneur is in control of his education, his in control of his health as much as possible. And therefore, if you think like an entrepreneur, you just figure out how could I serve others and then reap the rewards of finances if I help enough people. That's my recipe. What say you?
The key to success is capitalism with small, selected doses of socialism. That's what education is. That's what healthcare is. That's what small cash transfers are. They're small doses that enrich the nation, enrich capitalism, make capitalism function better. That would be my message.
My God, we're becoming friends as this progresses. Just so you know, this is getting better. My all right, now I got one more then. As a capitalist, all right, who do you look at as a better capitalist, Trump or Biden? Just on the aspects of just capitalism, who would you say?
Oh, well, I don't think Biden has ever dabbled seriously in capitalism, whereas Trump has, but he's not a good capitalist.
What do you
He's
mean?
gone bankrupt. Well, he's gone bankrupt 3 times. Four, is it maybe 4 times? I may be wrong about that. It's 3 or 4 times he's gone bankrupt, and uh,
He's the
he
438th richest person in the world right now. He just passed George Soros.
that may be.
How is he a bad guy? All right, we'll have fun. Well, you're gonna have to come back on because this is a long conversation. But his companies went bankrupt. He never went bankrupt personally. And of 500 companies, a four went bankrupt. I mean, that's unbelievable. The stats are in his favor, wouldn't you say? But anyways, he just went to 7.2 billion net worth. Pretty amazing. And I think capitalism is the way to freedom. So we can agree on that at least. And that's why I like you. So guys, if there's a website or a social media channel that you would love for people to look you up on, is it LinkedIn? Are you an X guy? Are you a Facebook or an Instagram guy? What's the best way to reach you?
None of those.
Erwin, what do
read,
you want then?
read Wealth and Welfare States, and read. There's a a, paper that followed that up. That's called
Justice?
no, it's
Oh,
called the American Welfare State Myths and Measurement, and summarizes these 3 myths that I talk about. That paper is worth reading. But the Wealth and Welfare State book is what I would recommend.
Beautiful. Guys, it's on Amazon. Wealth and Welfare States. Is America a laggard or a leader? So look it up and try to find him on one of the social media platforms once he does get an account, because he's fun to play with on a podcast, and to have a healthy conversation about the future of America. So Erwin Garfinkel, I really appreciate your time, and having the courage to come on a podcast and talk about Trump, capitalism, freedom, and maybe some solutions that you don't agree with. So I really, really respect that. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Nice.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.